Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me in this little rant/review of Luke Cage Season 2 on Netflix. Now, like my previous review of Season 1 of Punisher, I'm not going to be going over every individual episode in sequence or anything. I'm going to talk about my overall impressions of the story, the characters, the events, etc. So if you want a comprehensive review of the series, I suggest you go watch it yourself and make your own opinion on it. So if you haven't seen season 2, maybe give it a watch or listen on and see if it's worth your time from my perspective. Now, like several of the Marvel Netflix characters, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, I came into all of these shows not a active, knowledgeable nerd on them. So, I knew the basics of the lore of Luke Cage and Iron Fist and Jessica Jones, but I came into the TV shows with no real expectations or hopes and dreams for how they portray the characters. And so consequently, I still rate the premiere seasons for the Netflix series as follows. Number 1, of course, is Daredevil Season 1. Number 2 is Luke Cage Season 1. Then I go Punisher, Jessica Jones, and Iron Fist. Those are my rankings from 1 to 5. Now, the distance between the quality of those shows in between those rankings can be vast, depending on what we're talking about. But I liked Season 1 of Luke Cage. I liked the characters. I liked the villain, or at least the first one they had before they killed him off in the middle of the show. But that also being said, I'm not going to do too much of a review of Season 1 of Luke Cage, except in reference. I did a truncated review of it in a sort of omnibus Marvel review I did several months back, and you can find that in my reviews playlist. So I'm going to start first with a comment that I've made several times in several places about the Netflix Marvel formula so far, and why it seems as though they are making the same mistake over and over and over again. Now, what I presume Netflix has been trying to do since Daredevil Season 1 is the exception, is like with so many binge shows these days, is to have a unified story spread across the entire season, but told in, episodes. The problem is with Jessica Jones Season 1, Iron Fist Season 1, and to a lesser extent, but not as bad, Luke Cage Season 1. They have essentially what comprises maybe a 6 episodes worth of story that they then stretch over 13 episodes, interspersing it with filler, long dialogues, shots of nothing happening, repetitive conversations, go nowhere plot lines. And it's difficult to get through. And I know it's difficult to get through because 13 episodes of Luke Cage felt like years worth of my mental time as compared to 22 or 23 episodes, whatever it was, of The Flash season, was it 3 or 4 I just watched? I mean, DC knows how to do a comic book show. And I understand that Netflix and Marvel are trying to do a sort of a darker, more dramatic, grittier superhero universe on their side. And I respect that because Daredevil Season 1, and like I say, to a lesser extent, Luke Cage Season 1, etc., really do start forming that. The problem is they seem to be forgetting that it's also supposed to be a superhero show, and that there needs to be a relatively large level of melodrama along with your drama. And part of the problem of Luke Cage Season 2 is it tries to be really drama all the time, family drama, and not superhero show. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can do a superhero show, or really any TV show so far that I've seen. Like I said, you've got something, and I don't know if this is the real name for it. I call it unified episodic, where you have one overarching story for the season, but you have individual episodes that carry, the story forward bit by bit, but are in and of themselves self-contained stories. One of the most stark examples of this process, or this method, is House, the TV show House MD. Each episode was its own medical case that started at the beginning of the show, usually with a scene that showed the person getting sick, and then the show ended with them eventually being cured. And interspersed amongst this case was the lives and dramas of our main characters, whose stories were woven throughout the entire season, but each episode was its own sort of self-contained event. That is the most sort of cut and dry way to do it. A similar but far more rich show that does that was Breaking Bad. Like each season showed basically a year in the life of Walter White, and each episode gave a piece forward and forward towards his eventual downfall as a good guy into a rise as a bad guy, and then downfall again, the sort of, bell curve deal. Those two shows sort of exemplify what I think Netflix is trying to do with these shows. But like I say, the problem is that they try to take a story that maybe takes up 5 or 6 episodes, stretch it into 13. And how do they do that in Luke Cage season 2? Well, with long, repetitive, or go nowhere dialogues, with long, unnecessary, or why are we here musical numbers by various musical acts at the club Harlem's Paradise. And also plot lines that begin and never really end. They just kind of disappear off in the distance. So that's my broad thing. What I think Netflix should be doing is to take a cue from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for the last couple of seasons have basically split their seasons into 2 parts. They've called them, I believe, pods. So like you've got 22 episodes, let's say. The first 11 cover one dramatic story arc. And then the second season covers a different dramatic story arc. They are interrelated in that the characters that are involved in this are the same from one half of the season to the other, but they are in and of themselves essentially a contained arc. So you basically get 2 whole stories for one season of show. And you can, be very economical in your storytelling and not try to put in too much filler. And I wish Netflix would do that. But they're not, and they haven't been since Daredevil Season 1. What did they do in Daredevil Season 1 to avoid that? They established in the first episode all of the boss monsters the good guy would have to face. If you look at Daredevil Season 1 as a video game, you start off with seeing, here are all the crime bosses. And the mysterious Uber boss, which we don't meet until like episode 2 or 3, we don't physically see, is out there in the distance somewhere being lurking and looming. But we meet Madame Gao. We meet, what was it? Ubu or Obu? The Japanese leader, I forget his name. We meet the Russian brothers. We meet Owlsley. We meet these guys and we know ahead of time, these are the stages of the game Daredevil's going to have to go through. And so each one of those mob bosses, each one of their parts in the grand plan encompass a storyline that Daredevil's going to have to follow on through. And then we get to the big conclusion at the end where he fights the final boss monster, and it all feels very gratifying. Luke Cage Season 2 starts off with Mariah Stokes having been elevated effectively at the end of Season 1 to Queen Pin of Harlem. Through a very convoluted chain of succession, she is now sort of the crime boss of Harlem, along with her sidekick / lover / partner, Shades Alvarez. Oh, and before I go on, I just want to say one thing I won't be complaining about in Season 2 is the acting. Everybody did a great job. The acting in this season was great. I loved it. For the sake of what it was great. The characterizations, the motivations and such for the characters were god-awful, but the acting was fine. I don't have any problems with that. So Mariah Stokes is crime boss of Harlem. Luke Cage is still the hero of Harlem. He's now participated in the downfall of Cottonmouth Stokes, the original crime boss. Diamondback, the other supervillain who had his super suit to fight him at the end of Season 1. And he's also coming off of the Defenders short series, where he battled ninjas and supernatural forces and such. Although none of that really plays much into this except being referenced in the afterthought. We also have Misty Knight out of her disaster at the end of Defenders, where she lost her arm, which is canon of the comic books in the sense that she has a robotic arm, which she eventually gets from Rand Enterprises or Rand Corporation, whichever. I had thought that maybe they'd mention some Stark tech or something, like her arm comes from Stark prosthetics, try to tie it a little bit into the MCU, but they didn't do that. It just came fully from Danny Rand. So where are we at? Well, Mariah wants to become more powerful and rich, but she's introduced in the season as a burgeoning, if not already, alcoholic. She's drinking in the morning. She's kind of ditzy, for lack of a better phrase. She's all over the place, neurotic, and she's very, very clingy and dependent to Shades, who is the actual gangster of the two. We also have Luke Cage, who is still on a quest to find himself and understand what it means to be a hero and a role model and etc. And then we're introduced to a new character. A new character who, and again, I'm going to jump around a bit because the way they tell this story is so bass-ackwards that I can't talk about the character who shows up in the first episode without talking about what they do at the end of the series. So we were introduced to Bushmaster, a Jamaican gangster of some kind who is a member of the Yardies or the Stylers, depending on how you look at it. They go through a lot of exposition telling us about the gang sort of makeup of Harlem, except for introducing us to the other crime bosses. This is another thing that, like I said, they did right in Daredevil, they didn't do right here. We hear in passing about the Italians and the Koreans, etc., over the course of the show. We don't meet the people that represent those groups until like the last 3 episodes or so. And it just takes all weight out of there being a larger world going on in Harlem. If at least they showed up here and there, we'd have an idea that there's more forces at work. But we don't even see them or have any reason to think that they're even a problem until the end of the season. So Bushmaster shows up, and it's clear from the beginning, because he says it all the time, that he has a vendetta against Mariah Stokes, but specifically the Stokes family. He's always talking about the last name being this deal. Now, why does he have a vengeance against them? We don't know. We also see him get shot, but not die. And the bullets don't bounce off him. They kind of penetrate, but then fall off, leave dents. So he's not bulletproof like Luke Cage, but he's bullet resistant. Why is he bullet resistant? We don't know. What is his whole purpose for being here? We don't know. And that's fine to a point. But here's the thing. At like episode, I think it's 11, we get a series of flashbacks in that single episode. And I think it's episode 11. If I'm off by an episode, I apologize. But we get a series of flashbacks in a single episode back to the 1980s and Bushmaster's youth in Jamaica. And we find out at the 11th hour, if it is the 11th episode, that's kind of funny, why he is doing what he's doing, what his motivation is, why we should have any quasi-empathy for this murderous villain. Now, in my opinion, the season should have opened with the first flashback we see of Bushmaster's youth. Because if you take that single flashback out of context with everything that comes after it, it builds a mystery. It shows that there is a relationship between Bushmaster's family and Mariah's family that was contentious. But we don't know the whys and the wherefores as to why he's doing what he's doing, even if you show that. It should have opened. Season 1, episode 1, first 5 minutes should have been that flashback. And then we open up on the season and where Mariah's at right now at the Harlem's Paradise, talking about her grandmother, who was part of that flashback. There's a whole unified way of telling the story that could have been done so much better. But again, we got 6 episodes worth of story, 13 episodes. So there are 3 main things going on in this season. There's Luke Cage versus himself, because he's dealing with his anger and his search for purpose and his problems with his father and his problems with Claire as a result of problems with his father. Claire, who's in the show for like the first few episodes and then absolutely disappears for the rest of it. The other conflict we have is Bushmaster versus Mariah, and then to a tangential sense, Bushmaster versus Luke Cage. He sees both of them as rivals for control of Harlem. And then you have the conflict between Mariah and Shades as, relationship, lovers, partners, whatever. A lot of conflicts going on. Too many. Now, what is the story of season 2? Well, basically, Mariah wants to go legit by getting enough money to invest in a company who she has found out is going to be bought by another company. So she's conducting insider trading. But in order to get this money, she's going to sell her illegal gun business to the highest bidder in Harlem, which comprises 3 or 4 other minor gang bosses. And with this money, she's going to invest. The stock that she buys will go up in value. She'll become a zillionaire, and then she will put that money back into Harlem to, improve the community and all this other stuff. And Shades, who has an understanding of Mariah and everything else beyond even Mariah, says, don't sell the gun business. If you sell the gun business, we've got nothing to fall back on. Why don't you sell this ugly painting you have on the wall? And I guess the painting's a Basquiat. Now, I'm not an art critic, so I think it's an ugly painting. You may differ. And she says, no, sell the club, sell the painting. No. We're going to sell the business. I'm going to go legit, or at least appear legit, or do legitimate things. So there's this whole 3 or 4 episode quest to find a buyer. But each one of these buyers is murdered before they can do anything by Bushmaster. And Luke Cage is standing effectively helpless on the sidelines, knowing something's going on, but getting there too late. Superhero show, by the way. I was going to remind you, superhero show. And Misty Knight, who has just come off of leave for her injury, is now facing a whole bunch of flack at work and people making arm jokes at her in front of the entire office. And she's being oppressed, I guess. Also, she has a bad rep because of her partner in the previous season who was corrupt as hell and did corrupt things. Anyway, the drama with Misty Knight is almost unnecessary. I mean, you could remove the entire Misty Knight plotline. And I'm not saying you should. I mean, I like Misty Knight as a character. I'm just saying as far as the efficacy of it being in the show and the story, you could take her out of the show and you wouldn't be missing much. She doesn't do much. And in fact, she's actually used as a tool for filler. I'll get to that shortly. So Bushmaster takes out all the competition secretly without being caught. And then he becomes the only person able to buy the gun business from Mariah, which he does, and then gets all the money. Or it pays her all the money she needs to buy the stock, which she then becomes a $350 millionaire. So she's got $250 million over much, just tons of money. That's it. She's super uber rich right off the bat. But Bushmaster's not done. No. He knows that the entire deal was brokered by a single guy who's got the nickname of Piranha. And Piranha has power of attorney over the entire deal and the money and the club and everything else for the term of the whole thing being completed. So then, they go after Piranha to kidnap him, to get him to turn over all the cash to Bushmaster scot-free, because that's how the law works, I guess. And Luke Cage is trying to save Piranha, to stop Bushmaster, to expose Mariah and bring the whole, corrupted palace down on their heads. But he fails because Luke Cage isn't saving anybody in this season, really. He fails all over the place. He doesn't do any superheroing. It's very kind of boring watching him, because most of the time he's having long conversations with Claire, long conversations with his dad, long conversations with Piranha, long conversations with Misty, long conversations with the guys at the barber shop, on and on and on, and not doing much superheroing. But when he does do superheroing, what is it? Having bullets bounce off him and beating people up. Now, I understand, that's kind of what Luke Cage does. But I'll tell you, I have not seen more repetitious and boring fight scenes in a superhero show than Iron Fist. And I think this might actually be, as far as fight scenes are concerned, worse than Iron Fist. It was like watching the Power Rangers versus Putties, because there was no weight to it. There was no sense of threat or danger, because Luke Cage is indestructible. And not only is he indestructible, he's more indestructible this season than he was last season, because the effects of the events of season 1 apparently left him even more invulnerable, because early on he is shot with the fabled Judas bullet, the one kind of metal that can actually pierce his skin, remnants from the Incident, which it's called in Netflix, which refers back to the events of the first Avengers movie. But that doesn't hurt him. That all doesn't bounce off of him, but it's taken out relatively easily, and he heals up real quick. So what do you do when you have a character who's practically invulnerable? You have the same problem you do with Superman or Doctor Strange, where you have a character who is effectively a god. You have to come up with something or someone that can top him in some way, but they can't be permanently or superior to him ultimately, because he still needs to win eventually. So they come up with Bushmaster. Now, Bushmaster's got his powers how? Well, they eventually tell us kind of how it all happened by the end of the season. But by then, nobody cares, because he's stopped being the bad guy. Honestly, by the time we find out why he's able to do what he does in the flashback sequences, he's essentially removed from the story as being a villain. He hangs around for a couple extra episodes after being defeated for the last time. But then by the second to last episode or whatever, he literally is driven out of the story. He just goes away. And his story and beating him or trying to resolve that just doesn't go anywhere. So what was the point? Well, this is why this show should have been 2 stories. Okay. So anyway, backing up a little bit, Bushmaster arranges basically the downfall of Mariah. He uses the power of attorney to take all of her money, take the club, make her broke, and then he tries to burn her down in her own house with her daughter there with her. Mariah has a daughter that we find out about, who is a holistic medicine healer person, which of course plays into the whole where Bushmaster kind of gets his powers from. But all of that, her loss of all of her money and her assets and everything else is hand-waved away within 3 pieces of dialogue by like episode 12 or something. It's like it never happened. It might as well never should have happened the way it did. And so she suddenly has all of her money back. She has all of her assets back. She's just got done being in Luke Cage's protection from Bushmaster and police protection from Bushmaster and being threatened with arrest by the police and so on. And so what does she decide to do after she gets all of her money back? Go on a crime spree. Yeah, go on a slaughter of innocent people crime spree to prove that she's back, and she's back in control of Harlem. Whereas prior to this episode, and this is like episode 11 or something, prior to this, episode 12, episode 11 or 12. Prior to this, throughout the entire season, she has been a neurotic, distressed, out of sorts character who needed Shades to back her up and inspire her to be the crime boss he knew she could be, the gangster he knew she could be, because Shades really is the power behind the throne. Until the writers decided he couldn't be, and he turns into a pussy who can't handle killing innocent people, even though that's exactly what he's been doing off and on for 2 seasons. And now Mariah is the stone cold killer, and Shades has a conscience. For some reason. Or I should say, as Red Letter Media puts it, for no reason this happens. This heel turn occurs. And what happens, of course? Well, Mariah going all crazy by killing innocent people brings the police on her. She eventually gets arrested and tried and sent away to jail. And then she gets killed with a kiss of death by her own daughter, who has also had a heel turn back, forth, and sideways throughout the season, from being I don't want to have anything to do with my mother, she's a horrible person, to I'm willing to give my mother a second chance, to oh my God, you're still a crime boss, to well, I'll go along with this because I love you, mama, to now I'm going to get revenge on my mother for what her grandmother did to Bushmaster's mother by killing her with poison. Now, If that long, rambling soliloquy of mine sounds like utter and absolute nonsense, convoluted bullshittery, it is. But I've condensed down 13 episodes of material into a 6-minute rant. If that, maybe a little more. Now, that was it. That's the plot. And what happens at the end? Oh, well, Mariah dies, and she leaves the club in her will to Luke Cage, who loves Harlem as much as she does. And what does Luke Cage do with the club? The nexus for every bad thing and evil villain that has occurred in the course of this story so far. That was the headquarters of Cottonmouth, then the headquarters of Diamondback, then the headquarters of Mariah, then the headquarters of Bushmaster for like half an episode before it got taken away again. And then the headquarters of Mariah again. What's he going to do with it? He's going to take over and use it for good. And how do we know he's going to use it for good? Well, because we have a flashback in the middle of the episode at the end where Mariah explains to her lawyer why she's leaving the club to Luke Cage, because she wants to Machiavellian from the grave manipulate him into becoming a worse person, a worse version of himself. Yeah, and he does. And he now at the end of the movie or the show, he's wearing a suit and standing triumphant at the in the round window of the club, looking down on the stage as the musician does a rap just about him, and the crowd's going crazy. And why people keep attending this club, given the fact that every 2 weeks there's a gang war of shoot-'em-ups in there, I don't know, but there you go. Now Luke Cage is sitting at the top of the world. He is Michael Corleone. There are a lot of Godfather allusions in this season, and they even make blatant mention of Luke Corleone at one point. The kiss of death, going from one side of the law to the other kind of thing. Okay. So that's my summary of the season. What should they have done? Well, like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., this is how I think they should have done it, because the whole Mariah getting her money back and trying to become the crime boss again was so rushed. It was all packed into like 3 episodes, if that, or maybe 2.5. If Luke has to overcome the sins of the past story, this is how I think they should have done it. Episodes 1 through 6 should have been the Bushmaster story, where he shows up, he lays out his plan for vengeance, and they cut down the number of gangsters he's got to go through to get the guns down to like 1 or something, rather than like 4, where he's got to go after that, and spread it out over 2 or 3 episodes. And have Bushmaster's story of arriving, seeking his vengeance, getting his vengeance, and ultimately being defeated within 6 episodes. And then, or you could have 1 through 6 where he gets to that point, and then episode 7 is where he is defeated and then exiled, and then Mariah starts to work to get her kingdom back. And then you do that between episodes 7 and 12, where she works her way back up, gets her confidence back after being a wreck for the first half of the season. Shades builds her up until the big betrayal. Then she goes to jail. Then she gets killed. That would have been a much better way to do it. 2 essentially intertwined but different stories about different characters. Now notice how none of this has to do anything much with Luke Cage. The season has very little to do with Luke Cage. So I'm going to assume they didn't care about Luke Cage in this season. They just cared about the stories of the bad guys, because we spend more time with the bad guys, splitting our attention between Bushmaster and Mariah, than we do with Luke Cage or Misty Knight. Because Luke Cage doesn't develop in this show. He goes from a guy who is confused and angry at his father, is trying to figure out how to become a role model without selling out, yada, 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 till the end of the season where he's like, okay, I just had my biggest fan look me in the eye and tell me, if this is how you're operating, then you are a crime boss and you can't be doing this. And just shrugging and saying, well, if that's the way it's got to be, and walking out the door. Harlem's hero? Okay, Harlem's hero is going to become the guy running the club where all evil stems? Okay, great. So, and let me just mention something else. Misty Knight. So Misty Knight is a very compelling character. overall. The problem is that she is used in this movie. I keep saying movie, this show, as filler material. Her office politics, stressors, and oppressions, and everything else. It feels a little bit like The Punisher season 1, where we had to go off to Homeland Security every 10 minutes to remind ourselves that Homeland Security exists and not focus on The Punisher. So we got to see her office politics and her career rising after her injury. But the other thing that she does, or is used to do, there are 2 specific sequences in the season, 5 to 10 minute long segments each, let's say, where Misty does this. I believe she did something similar in season 1, where she kind of visualizes a crime scene and tries to recreate it in her head. And for the sake of the show, she's literally standing as they reenact the scene, the murder, the case, whatever. The problem is she does this in 2 incidents, which it could have been the case in season 1 as well, that we as the audience have already seen. We already saw the scene play out where this person got murdered, but we're watching the whole scene over a second time, simply this time with Misty sort of standing there and narrating as the action takes place in front of her, which is filler. It tells the audience nothing new. It doesn't do anything to enhance the usefulness of the character in our minds, because she's just telling us stuff as a narrator that we've already seen. If she showed up to a crime scene blank and did that whole thing, which is almost supernatural the way that they're portraying it, that would be interesting. That would be useful. Like, we come upon a scene where someone's been murdered, and then she suddenly goes into her trance thing and she sort of recreates it in her head, using the evidence in front of her and making deductions and stuff like that, Sherlock Holmes style. That would be cool. In this way, it's just nothing. But it's there anyway, and it helps to take up 20 minutes of time over the course of 13 episodes that has a 6-episode story. What else? Let me look at the chat real quick. Sorry, guys. I've been so focused. Let me look at the chat, see what you guys have to say real quick. Let's see. Midnight Exile said they seem to very quickly fall into a style and atmosphere over substance because the people making them don't know all that much about the property. You cannot know much about the property. I just think something tells me that whoever was the showrunner of this let too many cooks into the kitchen, because it's all over the place and it's such a meandering thing. It felt like somebody wasn't being the adult in the room for a lot of stuff, or having a clear idea of how to structure the storyline so it's presented to the audience in a compelling and interesting way. Because, like I say, I was literally dozing off at points watching this show over 13 episodes, whereas 23 episodes of The Flash, I wasn't bored for a minute. You know, some episodes were better than others, but it was always interesting to watch, and entertaining, and dramatic, and funny. You could have all those things in a superhero show. Let's see. Adrian Blom says Luke Cage season 2 was better for me. Well, like I say, different people have had different reactions to this. This is just, my perspective. Sweet Chili Tea says the Netflix Marvel shows suffer from being too long, every single one of them, and it takes several episodes to get really going. I don't think they necessarily have to be too long. Daredevil season 1 showed you could do this kind of story in a compelling and effective and interesting way throughout. It depends on good storytelling and good structure, and knowing how much to tell the audience without dwelling on stuff for too long. Now, in my opinion, Netflix and Marvel should not stick to this 13-episode format. If they don't have enough material to cover 13 episodes effectively, just shrink it down to 6 or 8 or something. There's no shame in that. There's series like Luther with Idris Elba. Like, each one of those seasons is like, 3 episodes, 3 2-hour episodes or something. And you get, and speaking of Godfather, I also think oftentimes when I'm watching one of these bingeable shows and everything, I think about how much world building, how much character development, how many memorable moments you got out of a 2.5-hour long Godfather film, and then look at 13 hours of Luke Cage and wonder to yourself, how come 13 hours worth of material for a character and development and storytelling can't be 4 different Godfathers, at least, Anyway, moving on. Johnny Hellcats is Queen Pin yours? That's a bit on the nose. No, I didn't make up that term. That's been a term for a long time. Kingpin was a term before the Kingpin existed. Fernandez says great suits. Yes, Shades' wardrobe in this. I wish I had those suits. Those suits are badass. That guy always dressed great, and they made him look cool the whole time. Shades is probably my favorite character in the whole show until he starts going all wobbly at the end, which I don't understand. Let's see. Dectran says Daredevil season 3 will be out in December. Yes, and supposedly it's going to be structured around the Born Again storyline from the comic books, which is one of the most celebrated storylines from Daredevil ever. I'm just concerned, given the other shows, and given how season 2 of Daredevil was, it was all right. It's hard to follow a champ like season 1, but I'm concerned that season 3 will be a disappointment. We'll see. Okay, and Midnight Exile says, I kept expecting Shades to get the Roxxon treatment. What do you mean? Like, just, I don't know what you mean by that. Like Roxxon, like making him into a super villain or something else. Anyway, what else? A couple other things that I noted on here. Oh yeah, Bushmaster. So his superpowers come from a combination of science and what I can only assume to be magic or spiritualism or whatever. Not specifically voodoo, although they make that joke about it. He got an injection as a kid amongst a bunch of other kids. He survived. Everybody else died. Then he got injured, for the sake of not spoiling everything, I won't say how. And then he was given a medicinal cure, a spiritual, cultural cure of nightshade that then not only healed his wounds, but then had, a reaction to whatever they injected him with, and it made him super resilient and powerful for a while before it wore off. But we don't find that out until the end of the season. Now, ultimately, it doesn't really matter where he got his powers. The fact that they don't explain everything to me is fine. But they jammed it all, like his origin story, his motivation for his true motivation for doing this. I mean, there's the family loyalty motivation, but there's a real motivation for him doing this that they don't reveal until the very end, where the perfect place to do so would have been had the flashback at the point where he's going to burn Mariah alive, where he tells the story of what happened to his mother by doing the flashback there. That would have been the appropriate moment to do that flashback. That's why I think those flashbacks they showed should have been interspersed in the first half of the season, not way at the frickin' end. What else? Oh, Iron Fist. Okay, so Danny Rand is the Purple Man of this season, as Purple Man was for season 2 of Jessica Jones. He shows up for one episode. Isn't nearly as compelling or fun to watch as David Tennant was in season 2 of Jessica Jones. Hangs around for a bit and then disappears. Now, he has long conversations with Luke about his temperament and about what being a hero is, just like he's had long conversations about that with every other character in the show to this point. They beat up some guys, and then I guess Danny just goes away. And you could have removed that episode from the show and nothing would have been missed. Nothing would have changed. Not really. But that was the one episode that opened up where I thought maybe they were doing an episodic thing, because it opened up with a problem that Luke Cage was asked to solve, which was people were overdosing on this crazy drug that was being called Bushmaster. And you see an opening scene at a party where people are doing the drug and they go nuts. And then we cut to someone going to Luke Cage and saying, Luke, there's this problem and you got to help us solve it. And I thought, damn, if only every episode or every other episode was somebody from the neighborhood coming to him with a problem, big or small, because he's Harlem's hero and him having to go out and solve it. At the same time, little bits of the overarching arc are taking place in the background or between the characters. Because why don't you show him being Harlem's hero for a while? I mean, practically every time we see Luke Cage out in public after the first couple episodes, he's being ridiculed by people for having gotten his ass kicked by Bushmaster. People are not reacting to him being in public. I mean, at this point, he's supposed to be some massive celebrity. And in this world, he would have been mobbed everywhere he went. But that only happens in fits and spurts and doesn't really have any effect on anything. He moves throughout the world. Sometimes people barely paying attention to him, even though he's supposedly famous. Yeah. What else? Oh, yeah. Bushmaster we're seen as being resistant to bullets and tough and as stronger or as strong as Luke Cage. And then we discover at the end of the season, in the last 3 episodes or so, oh, he can also dodge bullets. He can see a bullet coming and sidestep it. This is the only time that he does this in the entire show. We're not given any reason to think that he can do this prior, but at the point where Shades could have killed him, he dodges a bullet. We get slow-mo Matrix time to watch him do this. I'm like, okay. I love it when the rules of the game are never explained to us so they can make up their own rules at any point in the course of the story. That was great. What other notes do I have before I wrap this up? Because I think I've pretty much gone all over the place with this. Oh, 2 last things. First and foremost, there were a lot of scenes in this show where we spend time with Mariah and or Shades and or Bushmaster, where we are, the conversations they're having and the interactions they're having with other characters, so far as I can tell, are meant to humanize and make us empathize with them. And then we know that they've been chopping people's heads off, shooting people who are innocent, murder, left, right, and center. We're having family dramas, Bushmaster and his family, Mariah and her family, or Shades if you count him as family, with sadistic, cold-blooded, murderous villains. And I understand the lure of what The Sopranos did, but it was called The Sopranos for a reason. This is Luke Cage, not family drama, not different Stokes, as I wanted to call it. They actually made that joke near the end of the season. I thought I'd come up with a funny name for this stream, but no, they make the joke, so I can't claim 100% credit, but I thought about it beforehand. I was going to call this stream Different Stokes, because that's what the show is. It's a family drama about these crime families warring with each other, but it's not The Sopranos, it's Luke Cage, and Luke Cage is almost an afterthought in this show, honestly. And lastly, I never understood in a show called Luke Cage why everyone thought he was so important. And the reason for that being is he doesn't actually accomplish anything. You know, most of the people that he's talking about getting to before the gun sale takes place, they get murdered ahead of time. People are dying left and right. Luke Cage is beating people up here and there. And he hangs out at the police station where they all seem to just sort of like shrug their shoulders about this guy who really isn't helping anything and is kind of exacerbating a lot of the problems the cops are dealing with. But now keeps being cited as an asset and like he's the only one that can do this and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, why? You haven't even shown that he's done anything this season so far of value in helping the cops or doing anything or keeping a crime down or whatever else. If you were showing episodic instances of him saving an old lady from a fire or stopping, some kind of porn ring or something, I don't know, something, him doing some stuff that actually shows he's helping the community outside of just walking around and being shot at over and over and over again to remind us, yes, he's bulletproof. We know he's bulletproof. I think I got about as bored of seeing Luke Cage get shot and the bullets bouncing off of him as the character was by the end of the series or the season, because he makes the same comment after people shoot him for the 12th zillionth time. I guess he said something like, everybody's trying to see whether the urban legend is true or something like, yeah, again and again and again, despite all video evidence that should tell them it's pointless to try to shoot you. So anyway, look at the chat real quick before I wrap this up, because I didn't want this to go on too long, because like I said, this wasn't going to be comprehensive per se. Reterrapin says, the only issue I have with the Flash TV show, you have to watch Supergirl and Arrow to keep up. Only with the crossover stuff, which I've kind of gotten used to just sort of knowing a piece of it and then moving on, because you can almost it's structured in such a way you can remove those episodes from the story. You could actually skip over them, and the main story for each show doesn't really change so much. But yeah, there are elements and characters to each show that do crossover. It helps to watch the other shows. I don't think it's necessary. You will be kind of lost, unfortunately, in some instances of knowing the entire world building of it. So it's a blessing and a curse, because unfortunately I have to watch another season of Supergirl because Supergirl season 2 was season 1 was cheesy but okay. Season 2 anyway. Let's see. Dectran says Punisher Comics barely has any material. I check out Punisher number 45 from the original series and tell me that comic, that single issue didn't have plenty of material. It depends on what run of the Punisher you're talking about. Some of those older comics, man, they were worlds unto themselves. That's my opinion. Let's see. And he also, Dectran also says 8 episodes for like Defenders. Yeah, except Defenders was trying to cover so much ground with so many characters and trying to make them all tie together that they explain why they're a team and working together. That it kind of got lost in the mix of that and had to have a reason that they weren't working together, what turned out to be Danny Rand having a fit or a tantrum, which didn't help anything. Yeah, Defenders could have been better, much, much better. But there you go. Q says, it's weird listening to Scribe without Monkey interrupting. Well, I guess I'm unfiltered, so to speak. Let's see. Midnight Exile says, they're hiring non-comic people to make the shows now. That's the problem. It is a problem if you don't have an appreciation for the comic book medium and the sort of pathos of comic books. If you're just looking at it like, oh, I'm going to make a family drama using these characters and occasionally he has to get shot and bullets bounce off of him, then yeah, you're kind of missing the point. And like I say, I understand that the Netflix universe is trying to be a bit darker and more dramatic because they have less time to operate. It's not a 2-hour movie where you have to do everything at once. You have more time to tell a story. It's just the problem is that story isn't interesting and gets really boring real quick if there's not something superhero-y going on with the superhero. And with Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, their superpowers aren't flashy. They're just strong, each of them, and really, really tough in the case of one of them. How do you show off superhero-y stuff with that very often? Not really. So basically just have somebody walking around a lot and throwing people with wire work. And Fernandez says, Mariah's daughter was annoying. Yeah, Tilda could have been an interesting character, except her only purpose seemed to be to have her offense towards her mother go back and forth as the narrative required. And there was even an indication near the end of the season that she was going to be turning bad. Like she was going to be a Michael Corleone character as well, that she was suddenly accepting her legacy of her family and she was going to start becoming some kind of villain. Maybe next season she will. It'll make absolutely no sense, given that she killed her mother for being evil, for doing the kinds of things that Cottonmouth did, but in sort of a worse way. But now she wants to take hold of that legacy. I don't know. She was supposed to be some kind of moral compass in this whole thing, some sort of foil to Mariah's evil. But then she does things that are completely out of character insofar as what those characters were. And Rosalie Carbone shows up. You know, for those of you that are Punisher fans, you'll know the Carbone name is one of the crime families that Frank Castle went after, and Rosalie Carbone being the leader thereof that he clashed with often. She was one of the gang leaders, the other factions that was introduced at the 11th hour. I'm wondering if she'll show up in Punisher season 2. I hope so, because it'd be nice to see Frank fight the mob again instead of like Blackwater contractors and CIA assassins. Anyway, that was my long, meandering review rant about Luke Cage season 2. It was very difficult to watch. It was long. It wasn't interesting. It was boring. There were elements that, if they had been unto themselves for a whole 10 minutes rather than an episode, would have been fine, but they weren't. My faith in the Netflix Marvel method is decidedly petered out over the last couple of shows. Punisher was a big disappointment. I think more so because I'm a big fan of the original canon, so it hit me a bit more powerfully than maybe someone watching it blank. So I'm biased there, but otherwise, Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, this season, I don't know, guys. Some people have really liked Luke Cage season 2. I don't understand it myself, but that's fine. You know, everybody has their opinion. I got mine. You got yours. So if you have a chance and you feel like it, despite my relatively dour opinion on it, watch a few episodes of Luke Cage season 2. Definitely watch the first season first. The first season is decent, is interesting, and Cottonmouth could have been such a compelling bad guy if they'd kept him around, but they didn't, which is unfortunate. So anyway, guys, thanks for joining me on this little sojourn through my comic book nerdery and snobbiness. And I will see you all, hopefully, on Lords of the Night tonight, if you're watching this when I'm recording it, on Satsu's channel at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And until the next time, there is a Netflix show that I feel I need to say something about. Happy movie watching and happy TV watching, and make your own reviews. Please make your own reviews. I feel more people should make little videos about what they think about stuff. I find it interesting. Hope you found this interesting. Have a good day, guys.